You think you're safe in your own home, but what if the danger is already inside? The night started out like any other. He had the whole house to himself, which normally would have been a relief. No noise, no interruptions, just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs. His parents were out of town. His sister was supposed to be staying a weekend with friends, and he figured he had a rare chance to enjoy a little peace. He set himself up in the living room, phone in hand, a blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. Outside, the street was quiet, with only the occasional flash of headlights passing by. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, until it happened. From downstairs, so faint at first that he almost dismissed it, came the sound of someone calling his name. A single word, familiar. It was his sister's voice. He froze. His first thought was that maybe she had come home early. Maybe her plans had fallen through. It was the only explanation that made sense, because the voice wasn't muffled, wasn't distorted, wasn't something he could brush off as his imagination. It was clear. So clear it was like she was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He sat there for a moment, waiting, listening. When nothing followed, he tried to call back, half expecting her to respond with a laugh. But the silence that answered him was heavier than before, pressing down on the entire house. The longer he waited, the more wrong it felt. Grabbing his phone for light, he got up and started toward the staircase. His body moved, but every step felt like a mistake. The air was still thick, like the whole house was holding its breath. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended, and each creak only made him more certain that he wasn't supposed to be there. The first floor was exactly how he'd left it. No bags by the door, no jacket on the hook, no shoes on the mat. The kitchen lights were off, the living room empty. He walked slowly, shining his phone into every corner, whispering her name once more. Nothing. He stood in the center of the room, his pulse racing. Maybe he was overtired. Maybe his brain had played a trick on him. It was possible, except he knew his sister's voice. He knew the way it rose and fell, the exact way she said his name. This wasn't a random sound. This wasn't something his imagination could have pieced together, trying to convince himself it was all in his head. He locked the doors again and turned to head upstairs. But that's when he heard it. A sharp thud. It came from directly above him, from his sister's bedroom. His entire body went cold. That room was supposed to be empty. He hadn't even opened it since she left. Slowly, he made his way back upstairs, his phone shaking in his hand as the light bobbed across the walls. The closer he got to her room, the heavier the silence felt, as if something on the other side of the door was waiting. He turned the knob. The door creaked open. At first, nothing looked out of place. Her bed was neatly made, the closet door shut tight. But then his eyes caught it. On the floor, right beside the bed, a picture frame lay face down. The glass had cracked straight through the middle. He hadn't heard it fall earlier, and yet it hadn't been there before. As he bent down to pick it up, a wave of cold air brushed across the room, raising every hair on his arms. The house was sealed up for the night. No open windows, no draft. And yet, standing there, he could feel it. Something unseen, something wrong. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, he convinced himself to text his sister, trying to play it off like a joke. "Did you come home last night?" Even for a second, her reply was instant. "No." "Why?" He stared at the screen, fingers hovering, but he didn't type another word. He couldn't tell her. How do you explain something like that? To this day, he swears it wasn't his imagination. He knows what he heard. He knows what he saw. And every now and then when the house is quiet, he hears her voice again, calling his name from the bottom of the stairs, even when he's completely alone. The neighborhood was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that makes every sound echo just a little too loud. She had been home alone for hours, curled up on the couch with her laptop, the curtains drawn shut. Outside, the street lamps glowed dimly, painting the yard in soft pools of yellow. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual until her dog started growling. It wasn't the playful bark she was used to. This was low, deep, the kind of growl that vibrates in the chest and doesn't stop. She glanced over, expecting to see him staring at the door, but instead his eyes were locked on the front window, his ears pinned back, his body stiff. Slowly, with her stomach tightening, she got up and pulled the curtain back just a sliver. There was someone standing at the gate, not moving, not shifting their weight, just standing there, perfectly still. At first, she thought it might be one of the neighbors, but the longer she stared, the more wrong it felt. The figure was tall, too thin, their skin pale enough to catch the light from the street lamp. They weren't wearing a coat, despite the chill. And their face, she couldn't make out clearly, but it seemed off, like their features weren't sitting on their skull the right way. She let the curtain fall back, heart pounding in her ears. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe someone was lost. She told herself not to panic. Still, her hand hovered over her phone. Minutes passed. The dog didn't stop growling. Finally, she forced herself to look again, pulling the curtain back wider this time. She expected the figure to be gone. Instead, they were closer, just inside the gate now. Her breath caught. They hadn't made a sound. She hadn't heard the gate creak open, hadn't heard footsteps in the gravel. But there they were, standing halfway up the walkway, head tilted slightly, as if studying the house. She stumbled back from the window, fumbling with her phone. 911, that was the plan. But before she could even start dialing, there was a noise, sharp, sudden, a knock, not on the door, on the glass. The sound came from the window beside her, the one she had just looked through. Her stomach dropped. They were outside, right there, inches away, knocking slowly, deliberately. She could feel the vibration in the glass. The dog barked like he'd lost his mind, lunging toward the window, but when she finally found the courage to look, no one was there. The yard was empty. The gate was shut, the walkway clear. Shaking, she called the police anyway. When the officer arrived 20 minutes later, she tried to explain what she'd seen, how real it had been. He searched the yard, checked the gate, walked the property. Nothing. No footprints in the gravel. No sign that anyone had been there at all. That night, she slept with every light on. But the worst part wasn't what she saw. It was what the officer said as he was leaving. He stopped at the door, hesitating just long enough to make her uneasy. "Funny thing," he said, "you're not the first person on this street to report someone like that. Pale, quiet, just standing there." She asked him if they'd ever caught the person. He didn't answer. The hallway light had always been a little too dim, just enough to make the shadows look thicker than they should. He was 13 at the time, old enough to know the difference between dreams and reality, but young enough that the silence of big empty house still pressed on him like a weight. His parents had gone out for the evening, leaving him with nothing but homework, a microwave dinner, and the creak of the old house settling. By 9 o'clock, he was stretched out on his bed, earbuds in, trying to drown out the loneliness with music. That's when he felt it first. Not sound, but vibration. A faint tremor in the floorboards, so subtle he thought he'd imagined it. Then it came again. Steady, rhythmic, footsteps. He yanked the earbuds out. The house was quiet except for the sound of his own breathing. Too fast, too shallow. He told himself it was the neighbors, sound carrying weird through the walls. But this wasn't muffled. It was close. The footsteps were coming from a hallway, and that was impossible because the hallway door was locked. His parents always locked it from the inside before they left, just a habit they had. He had checked it himself earlier. He remembered the metallic click as the bolt slid into place. Yet the sound was unmistakable. Slow, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. Heel, toe, heel, toe, right outside his room. He held his breath, staring at the crack beneath the door. No shadows passed by, no shapes moved. Just that steady rhythm, as if someone unseen was wearing a path into the floorboards. Gathering his courage, he crept to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. The sound stopped instantly. Silence. He pulled back, nerves fraying, when suddenly the footsteps resumed, this time faster, sharper, rushing down the hallway, straight toward his room. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over his chair. The footsteps stopped just outside. He could feel it now. The weight of someone standing there, separated from him by only a thin slab of wood. His hand hovered over the doorknob, part of him desperate to fling it open and prove there was nothing there. Before he could move, the knob began to turn. It rattled violently, as though someone was forcing it, try to push their way inside. He screamed, backing into the far corner of the room. And then silence again. Minutes passed, maybe hours. He couldn't tell. Finally, he grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called his parents. His father's voice on the other end was calm, steady, but tinged with something he couldn't place. "Stay in your room," his father said. "We'll be home soon." When they arrived, the house looked exactly the same as when they'd left. Doors locked, windows latched, nothing out of place. His father checked the hallway, shook the knob, and gave him a reassuring smile. But years later, he learned something he was never supposed to know. Long before they bought the house, the previous owner had been a man who kept the hallway sealed off. He claimed there was something wrong with it, something that walked there at night, pacing endlessly. Neighbors thought he was losing his mind. Then one evening, the man vanished, gone without a trace. The only clue was where his body should have been, in the hallway. It was the kind of night when the whole world seemed to be asleep. The streets outside were empty, the only sound the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. She was in her bedroom scrolling on her phone, lights dimmed, trying to fight off the boredom that always came before sleep. Her window overlooked the backyard, a space that usually felt safe, private. Usually. She wasn't sure why she looked up when she did. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was a faint sense of being watched. But when her eyes flicked the glass, her heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing outside, not moving, not making a sound, just standing there in the dark, inches from her window. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, and his eyes seemed too wide, locked on her with kind of intensity that froze her in place. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't hiding. He just stood there, staring at her through the glass as if he had every right to be there, her breath caught in her throat. At first, she thought it had to be some kind of reflection, a trick of the light. But then he blinked. Slowly, deliberately, she stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The curtains. She had to close the curtains. But when she forced herself forward and yanked them shut, she swore she heard it. The faint scrape of a hand brushing against the glass. Her mind spun. Who was he? How long had he been there? And why wasn't he moving? She called her parents, whispering frantically into the phone. They told her to stay put, that they were on their way. The minutes stretched endlessly. She could feel him still out there, could almost hear the weight of his breathing through the thin barrier of glass. When headlights finally swept across the backyard, relief flooded her chest. But when her parents rushed inside to open the curtains, no one was there. The yard was empty. The grass was undisturbed. Not a single footprint. Her parents tried to comfort her, saying she must have imagined it, that maybe she'd been half asleep, maybe it was a dream. But she knew what she saw. And the worst part wasn't that the man had disappeared. It was what she noticed the next morning. On the outside of the window, right where his face had been, was a single faint handprint pressed against the glass. She cleaned it immediately, trying to forget. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the curtains are drawn, she swears she hears again the faint scrape of fingers tracing the glass, waiting for her to look up. It was just past midnight when the first knock came. Soft, almost polite. 3 taps against the front door. He had been lying on the couch, half asleep with the TV humming in the background. And at first, he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, even, deliberate. He froze. Every muscle in his body tense. Nobody visited at this hour. Nobody should have been standing on his porch in the dead of night. The third knock sent a chill down his spine. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. They were patient, waiting. He tiptoed toward the door, careful not to make a sound, and pressed his eye to the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. His chest tightened. Maybe it was kids playing a prank. Maybe the sound came from the pipes or the old wood settling. He told himself it was nothing and went back to the couch. But just as his heartbeat began to slow, the knocking started again. Louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. He shot to his feet, heart racing. He checked the peephole again. Still nothing. Empty porch. Empty street. And yet the sound didn't stop. Knock, knock, knock. He grabbed his phone, hands trembling, and dialed the police. When the officer arrived 15 minutes later, the knocking had ceased. The porch was empty. The street silent. The officer checked the lock, walked the perimeter, and shrugged. Probably some kids, he said, though his tone carried no real conviction. After the officer left, the house was too quiet. He sat on the couch, clutching his phone like a lifeline, ears straining for any sound. That's when it started again. Knock, knock, knock. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the back. He bolted upright, adrenaline surging. But when he reached the kitchen and peeked to the blinds, the backyard was empty. No movement. No shadows. Nothing. The knocks grew louder, sharper, coming now from the side door, then the garage, then the windows. Always 3 at a time. Knock, knock, knock. He covered his ears, begging for it to stop, but the sound seemed to seep through the walls, vibrating inside his skull. Every door, every window, every corner of the house. The knocking circled him, relentless, closing in from all sides. And then silence. He didn't sleep that night, didn't move from the couch. When dawn finally broke, the sunlight pouring through the windows made it almost possible to believe it had all been in his head. Almost, because when he opened the front door to check, his stomach dropped, all across the porch, covering the wood in neat, perfect rows, were handprints, dozens of them, some small, some large, pressed into the paint as if made by hands coated in ash. And in the very center of the door, just at eye level, was a single phrase scrawled into the wood, written with what looked like the same blackened substance. "Let me in." She was 16 the night it started, lying in bed with her headphones in, the glow of her phone the only light in the room. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning, and the house was quiet enough that she could hear the faint creak of the wood as it cooled. She had almost dozed off when something shifted beneath her. At first it was so subtle she thought it was nothing, a slight dip in the mattress, like when a cat jumps up beside you. She sat up, pulled her headphones out, and scanned the room. Nothing moved. The door was closed. Her dog was asleep downstairs. She lay back down, telling herself she was imagining things. But then came the sound, a soft drag of fingernails across the wooden floor, directly beneath her bed. Her blood turned to ice. She froze, too scared to move, straining to hear. The sound came again, slower this time. A scrape, then a pause, as if whatever was beneath her was waiting for her reaction. She clutched her phone like a weapon and lowered it toward the edge of the bed, the light spilling into the narrow shadow underneath. Empty, her breathing slowed. Maybe it had been a rat, or her imagination running wild. She forced herself to laugh, though her voice shook. She set her phone back on the nightstand. The moment she turned away, something whispered from the shadows under the bed. "I see you." She jolted upright, slamming her back into the headboard. The whisper was faint, childlike, but it came from inches below her, heart hammering. She leapt from the bed and bolted for the door. Her parents came running, but when they checked, there was nothing there, just dust beneath the bed, untouched. That night, she slept in her parents' room, refusing to go back. But the next evening, while the house was quiet and the lights were off, her parents heard it too. The faint scrape of nails dragging across wood, coming from her empty bedroom. They tried everything, new mattress, new bed frame, even moving her into the spare room, but it didn't matter. The sound followed. The whispers grew bolder, and every night, when the lights went out, the same childish voice returned. "I see you." Now, years later, she swears it still follows her, no matter where she goes. And the only way she can sleep at night is by keeping her bed pressed tight against the wall, because as long as there's no space underneath, there's nowhere for her to hide. It started as a simple antique find, a tall, gilded mirror with ornate carvings, bought from a dusty estate sale by a woman who thought it would look elegant in her hallway. She polished the glass, set it against the wall, and admired how perfectly it caught the light. But almost immediately, things felt wrong. The first night, she walked past and caught sight of something strange in the reflection. Her living room looked the same sofa, same shelves, but the version in the mirror seemed darker, as if the shadows inside stretched too far. She tried to shake it off. Old glass warps, she told herself. It was nothing, but then the reflection began to lag. She would pass by, and for a split second, Her mirror itself didn't move with her. It would linger, staring back at her with an expression she wasn't making. One night, she stopped in front of the mirror and smiled just to test it. Her reflection smiled back, but slower, wider, until the grin stretched unnaturally across its face. She covered the mirror with a blanket that night, telling herself she'd get rid of it in the morning. But at 3 a.m., she woke to the sound of fabric tearing. When she crept into the hallway, the blanket lay shredded at the mirror's base. The glass was uncovered, and her reflection was already standing there, smiling. She screamed and threw a sheet over it again, dragging it to the garage. But even with it gone from the house, the feeling lingered. She swore she could hear faint tapping on the walls at night, like fingernails against glass. The next morning, she went to check. The mirror was waiting for her in the hallway again, exactly where she had first placed it. Her hands shook as she reached out to touch the frame, to convince herself it was real. And when her fingertips brushed the glass, her reflection didn't mimic her. Instead, it pressed back. She staggered away, horrified, but it was too late. From that moment, her reflection no longer belonged to her. Sometimes, when she walks past another mirror, she swears the figure on the other side doesn't move. And sometimes when she stares too long, she sees it smiling, waiting for the chance to pull her through. You've heard the whispers, the knocks, the voices that weren't supposed to be there. But the scariest part? These stories don't always end when the video does. Some of them linger, waiting, watching, replaying your mind when a room goes quiet. If you've ever had an experience you can't explain, share in the comments, because your story might be next. And if you're brave enough, stay tuned. The night is only just beginning.